All right. Okay. Hello, everyone. I am Elisa Melendez. I am a doctoral candidate in comparative sociology at here, FIU. And today we're going to talk about video games. Specifically, we are going to talk about rock music video games, and specifically as they pertain to my project, for those about to rock gender codes in the rock music video games Rock Band and Rocksmith. So here is a brief overview of what we're going to cover today. We'll do a brief introduction of the games that were part of my case study. We're going to go over what I was looking for, what I did, how I did it, why I did it, conclusions, as well as limitations and why this matters. As an aside, it's a little light, but some of the pictures that you will see, hopefully, in the background, they're also included in the dissertation, but this specifically right here is a screen cap from my broadcasting my gameplay on the video game live streaming service Twitch. And as it so happens, this presentation is currently being live streamed on the video gaming streaming platform Twitch right now. So hello to everyone else out there in Twitch land. So this particular study focuses on the intersection of video games and music, as is found in the rock music video game. And this genre is exemplified by Rock Band, which is sort of shown on the left, and Rocksmith, sort of shown on the right. Rock Band simulates rock musicianship through the use of plastic instruments, guitars and drums and microphones, whereas Rocksmith is a video game where you can plug in a real guitar or a real bass and actually learn how to play songs through the game. Now, as a woman and person that both plays video games and performs music, I saw fit to approach this particular subgenre from a feminist lens. And what I sought to ask were these, my research questions. I wanted to know, how are Rock Band and Rocksmith gendered, and whether they emulate or subvert gendered music or gaming discourses. In particular, in my own experience, I saw that there was a significant overlap in these two genres in terms of gender coding. For example, women not being represented in the canon, women not being represented as much as producers of this content. Women who engage in these forms often have to work twice as hard to get as much recognition, and even if they end up in the industry, they can often be forced out due to harassment. I also wanted to look at how are gender norms hardwired into the games themselves. So specifically, what is found on a game's disk, on a game's code, as put there by developers that could be particularly gender coded. And I also wanted to look at what possibilities exist for subversion of these gender norms. And I want to note here that this particular research question calls out solo performance, small groups, and public play as sites of potential resistances. And I wanted to point that out because, as you might see throughout the course of this presentation, I actually found things were not quite what they seemed. Now, the framework that I was going into this with was a framework that looked at not just the game, but also the creators and the players. The creators are the people that make the game from conception to completion, as well as the people that market the game to an outside audience. The game is the hard-coded elements, the user interface, what it is that a player interacts with, the in-game text, the visuals, the audio. And the player interacts with the game and has the experience, depending on which game you play, of either performance simulation or actually learning the song. In turn, the player can affect the creators through community feedback, whether this is through formal surveys that the creator conducts, or through even things like social media or forums where the community has a chance to talk back, and eventually the creator may make improvements to the game based on that. So here are my methods. It was very mixed and very varied. I conducted semi-structured interviews with select makers of Rock Band at the Harmonix Development Studio in Boston, Massachusetts. I also conducted semi-structured interviews with the makers of Rocksmith at the Ubisoft San Francisco studio. I conducted a discourse analysis on how it is that rock musicness, or rock musicianship, is constructed through these games. In particular, I went through a playthrough where I constructed an avatar in Rock Band and played through some songs. And I also have significant experience playing Rocksmith as well. I conducted a text analysis of Rock Band in particular, looking at, and thank you once again to Harmonix for giving me this, they actually gave me every string of text in the game for me to analyze. And I also looked at options for avatar customization. So for content analysis, I conducted a quantitative content analysis of what songs were available to play in Rock Band as well as Rocksmith to see how women musicians are represented in what numbers and what roles they played. I conducted participant observation, observing public play at a club, as well as through experience working at video game conventions and looking at sites of public play. I conducted some informal interviews with players, including a professional Rock Band player, and conducted an online survey of players focusing on avatar identification and gender codes in music games. And because I did not feel like I could adequately separate myself, there's no such thing as being 100% objective, and even with, something like critical distance, I could not ignore my own situatedness within this study as a woman musician and a woman who plays video games. So I decided to face that head on through the lens of autoethnography. Cool. So let's start there. Knock that out. This is actually a picture of me playing Rocksmith at a music festival in Seattle, demonstrating the game. So I really got embedded in the actual study itself. So here, through my look in autoethnography, I found that there was a significant experience of harassment in both industries, but specifically in video games with more capacity for online harassment. There is a whole lovely section of a chapter in that dissertation where you can actually see screenshots of messages that I've received online, mostly just by being a woman presenting sort of avatar online. I also go into my experience as a Fragdoll cadet. This is an all-woman internship team that was put together in order to sort of help women get their foot in the door in the game industry. So I talked about my experience there. And through that experience, I found that there was an active attempt to subvert and resist gender codes, mainly just by showing up and being there. And I also go into my online broadcasting experience where I analyze whether or not I end up reaffirming some stereotypes and some gender codes of both rock music and video games, both by my instrument selection when I play Rocksmith online, and also by including a more experienced male musician. Now for Rock Band. Now, Rock Band is really awesome in the sense that it actively creates a faithful replication of what rock musicianship is like. And it does this in a variety of ways. It does this through avatar attitudes. So when you create an avatar, you can actually select what attitude it has on stage, and its movements and performance is based on the genre of music. So your rock attitude is different from your metal attitude, which is a lot more aggressive, and your goth or emo attitude is a lot more sullen and reserved. Clothing customization is another site. It's also divided by genre, but you can also have the common trappings of rock musicianship, including clothing and makeup and different hairstyles. And in the in-game text and narrative, it also creates a picture of rock musicianship, including things like trivia for bands and songs that you're about to play, as well as the overarching story of your band that you create trying to make it. So here I have a screenshot of my avatar, of course in red hair, fighting with the rest of my bandmates in front of a broken down bus as we're trying to get to the gig. So even in little vignettes like that, it's kind of showing your progress as a rock musician, as is kind of a commonly pop culture held story. Now, when you present these faithful representations, they can often carry gendered baggage along with them. And one was in the set list discrepancies. So out of the just over 2,000 songs that I looked at, I found that only about 14% had any women in those bands at all, regardless of role. And I also found that about 20% of those women were guitar players, about 19% were bassists, only about 9% drummers, and 50% of women were vocalists, which is kind of an interesting look because it sort of matches in a faithful representation of rock music where women are predominantly seen as vocalists and instrumentalists second. There are other ways that this gendered baggage shows up to and including character customizations. Now, when you can customize your character, whether you have a male or female character, gender binary notwithstanding, you have clothing options and makeup options that are available for both male and female avatars. And a lot of those even carry the same descriptions, the same little sort of blurb underneath the title. However, it wasn't all completely unisex, both in the available options and even in the descriptions. So here is an example of a couple of corduroy pants. It's common rock regalia, I guess. And the description, the price, and the title of the item is different. So for example, for the male avatar, which is $10 cheaper, the text is, "They say you only need to know 3 chords. How many do you know? These chords will let them know what a virtuoso you are." However, for the women corduroy pants, the text reads, 4 chords are better than 3 in these perfectly worn corduroys. So right there, kind of putting a limit to virtuosity in 4 chords for women, whereas the sky is a limit for men. And that's just pants. There's other text, including text that you might see pop up as you're moving from one game state to another. That's called loading screen text. And in some of those tend to focus on trivia. And sometimes in those blurbs, you also have trivia about the songs that you're going to play. In those, I found that kind of matching with the set list, about 14% of those trivia points featured women, but a lot of women were being referred to in relationship to a male counterpart. So things like a trivia point about Ozzy Osbourne that mentions his wife, Sharon, the manager. Also, there is other in-game text up to and including, as part of your narrative, you can earn parts of an entourage for your rock band. So if you do well enough in this game, you can get a bodyguard, you can get a manager, right? And all of these people that you can sort of collect are unisex. There are no pronouns that delineate gender except for the sound guy that you earn as part of your rock music entourage. Now, this could be something, and it could be sort of seen as a one-off. However, when only about 5% of audio and music production roles go to women, things like referring to a sound guy often end up reifying these stereotypes. Okay. Now, let's talk about subversive opportunities. And this is kind of where a lot of my thinking shifted, was when I actually went to visit the creators and talk to them through interview. I found that subversive opportunities exist within the development camps themselves, whereas I initially thought that they would be solely found in the player base. So in my interview, I met with a writer from Harmonix that actually says, when I kind of told her a line that initially inspired this study, it was a loading screen tip that said, "When in doubt, blame the singer's girlfriend." And I told her that, she was kind of crestfallen and said, if I wrote it, it was probably in the first few years of my career, because now I would never do a gender thing. I don't think there's ever been a pronoun or an assumption about gender, and by that she means gender of the player character. We're really hardcore. We keep the company extremely hardcore about it. So this becomes a kind of a significant part of company culture in the creation of the games, to actually not make assumptions about gender, even though the sound guy thing still slipped through. Now, when it comes to Rocksmith, right? Rocksmith I see as a sort of way forward, a kind of next level representation where instead of simulating performance, you can actually have the chance to perform yourself by being able to learn songs on a real guitar, real bass. Now, I did the same thing where I looked at the set list for Rocksmith as well as Rock Band, and I found that these gendered codes still remain and representation is still lacking. So out of the 1,000 songs that I looked at for Rocksmith, I found that there were only about 10% women, and here, when broken down by the numbers, they are again mostly vocalists, which, yes, this about is pretty much a lot of the same distribution as you might see in a rock band, and perhaps as you might see in a cursory look at rock music itself. However, in Rocksmith, it's a little bit more damning because you can't learn drums and you can't learn vocals. So we're really trying to look at women's representation on guitar and bass, and maybe just sticking a song that has a woman vocalist might not necessarily be cutting it in this particular game. Another cool thing is that Rocksmith doesn't have an avatar. It is basically a first-person view of a stage, and the notes kind of just come at you and you learn how to play, but there's no actual avatar that you create. So I had to find other places where this gendering may exist, and I did find that the user interface was an interesting site of gendered baggage. And this didn't necessarily come from my own looks at it. In fact, it was sort of handed to me by the developers. So in talking with the developers, they looked at the first iteration of Rocksmith that came out in 2011, and the user interface, so the sort of look and feel of the game that you interact with, they were going for a whiskey, dark brown, musky feel to the game. When we were making these videos, lessons and things that accompany the game, we were going for, I forgot the name, the greatest man in the world type thing. That was the attitude they were going for. They were referring to the most interesting man in the world ads from the beer brand Dos Equis, where it's this sort of leathery voiced guy of mystery, and that's the kind of person they were trying to create and potentially cater to. However, as a result of a player survey that they conducted with about 5,000 players after the release of this game, they found that their player base was 99.7% male. At this point, any company might say, all right, cool, that's where our marketing dollars are going to go for the next one. However, they didn't. In fact, they actually subverted a lot of these sort of gendered leather whiskey-soaked stereotypes that they kind of reified in their first game when making the second one. So they said, we're going to change it. We're going to brighten it up. We're going to make it light. We don't want girls feeling this is something just for my dad. Because one of the things that they found was that their player base skewed a lot older than they thought. Because a lot of folks think that the only people that play video games are, teenagers, maybe 18 to 35 at the oldest. But they did find that their player base skewed a lot older. And so usually the type of girls that would get into the game were people whose parents were playing the game. So we wanted to make sure that it was more accessible. So they actually changed the user interface. So instead of this kind of leather brown, orange, black situation, they brightened it up. It's an airy loft instead of a basement. Even the person who is giving you the lessons is dressed in flannel with the sleeves rolled up, and it's a little bit more of a casual alternative look. Now, those are the games, right? And I looked at the creators. Now, when turning to the players, I conducted both some semi-structured interviews and survey. In semi-structured interviews with some players, and this in particular was inspired by my experience receiving gendered harassment on the Xbox Live service after my avatar presented, well, almost kind of like this, in a dress and red hair. And I asked them, how do you represent yourselves? And how do you like to see yourselves represented if that is what you go for when you create an avatar? So I found that most of my respondents actually want to create either exact replicas of themselves or enhanced versions of themselves. Just some minor tweaks. And this led me to thinking that, yes, I believe looking at avatar and avatars and avatar customization is important because, especially as a woman of color, it kind of creates a bit of a cognitive dissonance if I'm trying to create myself and you're saying the rock star is me, but I can't make myself. So this is kind of helped me sort of reinforce that I was potentially looking in the right place. In the player survey that I conducted, it was an online survey distributed through the methods available to me, including forums and social media. About 163 people responded, and 87% of those folks identified as male. And what was sort of an interesting result was when I asked the question of, who do you think Rocksmith is for and who do you think Rock Band is for? Rock Band was found to be more likely to cater to all genders, and Rocksmith was more likely to have been found specifically targeted to, and some people actually said this as a quote, oh yeah, straight white dudes. Rocksmith is just for straight white dudes. Now, what's interesting is that you could sort of ask the question, why that potentially is. And when conducting that survey, I conducted it as a result of the first iteration of Rocksmith, that was the whiskey-soaked version. It would be kind of interesting in a future study to see what that answer would be like now, that the sort of brighter, airier Rocksmith 2014 has been out for a few years. Another finding was that about 17% of those folks that I interviewed experienced some form of harassment, specifically due to race, gender, or sexuality. However, when I asked them specifically, do you experience this kind of behavior in music games? Only about 4% experienced that kind of harassment, specifically within a context of playing a rock music video game. So, quote, I kept getting challenged by a random because I was singing better than him on vocals. And he said it wasn't fair because I'm a girl, which meant that I could hit the high notes. And anyone that knows music knows, hey, not every woman has the same range. And another quote, I've had people say that playing Rock Band at a tournament level does not qualify me as a gamer. And having the identity as a professional video game player because you only play certain kinds of games. And I posted some gaming videos on YouTube, and sometimes people would comment on my appearance rather than my performance in the game. So, and even in talking with the professional Rock Band player, even though she was great and very, very professional, she found herself trying to almost work twice as hard to be taken just as seriously. And even when she was blowing away the competition, she would find that people would comment on her appearance, or even if they might have just seen her on stage, they would think that she was somebody's girlfriend at the competition. Now, where do we go from here after looking at the games themselves, after interviewing the creators, after talking to the players? I found that in answering research questions, yes, Rock Band and Rocksmith are gendered productions, and those are displayed in a variety of ways. Gender is hard-coded in the games, in fact, in more places than where I thought I would find it, and including things like the user interface, the setlist discrepancies, the ways that you can customize your avatar and what options are available, what options are quote-unquote unisex, and the ways that these customizations are described. However, that's not the only place that gender codes exist, and that was another interesting finding, particularly that popped up during my participant observation, where I was showing off the first Rocksmith game at a video game convention, and my job was to help handle people who wanted to pre-order the game before it came out. And they had hired a carnival barker type personality to try and attract people to the booth. And even though, other than the developers of the game, a lot of the booth staff was mostly women, he saw it fit to include this line as a way to sell the game, which is, "Come over and play Rocksmith. It is the game that video game website IGN says is guaranteed to get you laid." That doesn't make me want to play Rocksmith, I don't know what does. It's kind of still playing on that, just that one line is playing on that whole kind of stereotype and story of picking up an instrument to get chicks. Well, who has the opportunity to get chicks? It's already playing into both gender and sexuality stereotypes all in one seemingly throwaway phrase that's supposed to allegedly attract people to a booth. Now, when it comes to subversion, it exists. Definitely by players showing up. A lot of folks in my semi-structured interview talk about how even just the presentation of their avatar as female ended up eliciting a lot of different responses. So sometimes just by showing up, whether that's through avatar or through using your microphone, even when you're talking in an online setting, that could be one way of continuing to subvert stereotypes that for some reason still exist, that women just don't play video games or just aren't as good. Now, what I did find though was that the players were not the only site. Subversion actually does exist in studios, and this is in the process of creating what is called, by Fullerton and other folks, a virtuous cycle. And this virtuous cycle is created when there is hiring diversity in video game studios, and more diverse studio populations can contribute to more inclusive game design. And this more inclusive game design can hopefully attract a wider population of players. And I actually found that it seems that this virtuous cycle was at work here, especially in the case of Rocksmith, where from game to game, they completely shifted in order to create a wider player base. Of course, it's not all perfect. Now, this took a long time. This is my 9th year, and it's 11 if you count the work that I did for my master's degree looking at gender and popular music specifically. And in this time, I started this study when rock music games were relatively popular, but over time, the genre has kind of waned in popularity, which could beg the question why it is that it could potentially be even relevant for me to even study this. I would argue that it is. Rocksmith keeps coming out with downloadable content in the form of songs every single week. So does Rock Band to support their latest Rock Band rival games. And even the Studio Harmonix is creating new games. They have a board game that actually uses music technology to play with music and create remixes. They're still producing games that use music, even if it's not Rock Band proper. So I would say that this would be still relevant in the case that even though it's not as popular and it's a little bit more niche, I would say that this study could definitely inform those sites. Also, the time spent, because of the game's popularity, it limited the amount of places where I could conduct public play participant observation sessions. In fact, I went to a club in downtown Miami, which probably should have been my first clue, and they were hosting a Rock Band night, and I observed a couple of public play sessions there. The next time that I went, they had completely changed the game to a rap-based game. And then the next time I tried to see if they had one, they had completely abandoned the music game entirely and just straight up just played music for people to dance to. So it did kind of create a little bit of issues trying to find sites to look at public play. Now, another limitation is my laser focus on gender here. Now, that means that this may not be the most intersectional project on music games that there could be. Race in particular is fraught. His rock music, American rock music, is black music, co-opted by white musicians in the service of white audiences. And this is being translated into video games that are made by predominantly white hands that are then marketed and sold to a player base that is also predominantly white. So that is missing, and I know this. However, I do look forward to potentially continuing my study and perhaps broadening my scope in future works. Class is also an issue that doesn't necessarily come up, and it also doesn't necessarily get as analyzed in rock music literature as much as I would like, because to even play a video game requires a significant financial investment. Consoles are hundreds of dollars. To get a computer that's strong enough to run something can also cost you hundreds of dollars. A game nowadays is about $60, and that's not counting downloadable content that will often come out week after week that can range from $5 to $15, depending on how much you want to buy. Even the means to create music and create games is often fraught with class struggles. That is also missing from the work. However, I feel like this work has a lot to contribute as well. I believe this gives a new site for feminist musicology. It's a new place where musicologists can look at performance and the consumption and appreciation of music in a new kind of virtual stage. It gives feminist games research a new genre with which to apply a feminist lens versus, say, looking at more mature titles that focus on sexualized avatars or overly violent content, this is another place where you can still see a lot of gendered baggage. It also gives rock music video game academics, they do exist, it gives them a chance to look beyond simulation and pedagogy. So instead of looking at how well these games can teach music, or how well Rock Band simulates accurately the feeling of playing a guitar, you can actually look at things beyond just simulation and pedagogy, including gender, and hopefully race, as well as class. Also looking at the creator-player game dynamic, it shows that a game is more than just the code on a disc. You can analyze it as text or as film or as literature, but a game is more than that. It is created by people and it is played by people. By centering the player-musician through autoethnography, I find that one cannot deny the experience of both playing music and playing a video game and having it be highly immersive. Instead of having someone else play the game and then just looking at the gameplay and analyzing that, I wanted to analyze how I performed and how my experiences contributed to this research. This research goes beyond the game disc. Because of downloadable content, updates that are released on a regular basis, and because games are not just games, they are often franchises with multiple iterations over years, it goes beyond what's on the shelf and looks at how games and their attitudes towards them and their creation can change over time. It goes beyond violence because these games in particular are accessible to a wider audience, and a lot of games academics tend to focus on games that are available for folks that are 18 and over. These tend to be rated T for teen, so anyone 13 or older can do that. And anything with such a wide player base, especially Rock Band, which is played by families, or even Rocksmith, which is referenced by girls picking up their game because they watch their fathers playing it, it's important to actually turn this lens toward those games as well. And this study goes beyond the ivory tower. Not that I don't like spending time here, but I believe this research, I mean, it's great, it's fab, it's fabulous.
Where did you find a room this way?
I know. This research also has the capability of, instead of, hanging out in the library, which I would love for it to end up in, it can also affect game development studios themselves and actually exact change within development studios. It could be a site of activism instead of just focusing on the academic. And hopefully this can inspire not just academics, but also developers to create more inclusive games and hire more inclusively so that these games can inspire people to pick up a controller. It can inspire more people to pick up a guitar. Maybe it'll inspire a wider, diverse population of folks to pick up both. Thanks.
Thank you.
Cool.
Lose it is over. All right, so
Phew.
who wants to, now we're gonna shoot some questions at you.
Cool. Let me have a
Ask
seat
some
so I can take some
clarifications
notes
when
and
you sit
stuff.
down,
Cool, yeah.
and
Take some notes.
we'll go from there.
Great.
Who wants to
There's
start?
one question I was thinking as I was listening to you.
Of course.
So if you think of how women have made inroads into certain industries, whether it be education or whether it be medicine or lots of areas, one area in which, like what you're studying, women have not really made inroads is professional sports. Right? Think of football, basketball, baseball, especially in the U.S. It really is male players for playing for an audience that's mixed, but it's really focusing on male virtuosity. I'm wondering if you see some similar. It seems to me also in certain genres of music, especially rock and maybe other popular genres. Similarly, women have not made, as you've shown, inroads that you would expect. They're still limited to just, first of all, they're a minority, they're vocalists, they can't be, they don't play the instrument. And so I wonder if something similar is going on in these areas, because, we've seen women sort of, make greater, there's still, a lot of room for, other successes if we haven't made enough inroads into electoral politics, for example, unfortunately. But we've made some there, and it just seems to me that particularly professional sports and these kind of popular music especially are still so male-dominated or so gendered in ways that are surprising given, other ways our society's changed. So do you see some similarities there?
Totally. In fact, I mean, probably if I wasn't studying, music or video games, I would say sports is probably my third love. I find that for example, in conversations that I've had with musicians friends of mine who I absolutely adore, they still insist on saying things like, oh yeah, have you heard this person? She plays in Beyonce's band. She's a great chick drummer. Or Lenny Kravitz had a great chick bass player. I just wanted to shake them by the shoulders. And I find even with Serena Williams, people will say that she's the greatest tennis player of all time, but then everybody also has to add that asterisk about saying, oh, well, she's great for a girl. She's great for a woman. And yeah, it's totally like that. And people will even try to sort of pin things on women athletes, or the hockey team or the soccer team, especially the soccer team that is asking for more pay or equal pay as their male counterparts. And then you even look at things like they've won more World Cups than the men in recent years, and still it's like, yeah, but nobody wants to watch women's sports. There's a lot of it still there.
The focus is often on how they look, how the female players look, as opposed to there's athletic talent.
Yeah.
And similarly, it seems to me in popular music, they're more interested in how the women look as opposed to their musical talent. And there's something limiting if you think about maybe the two together, why in those particular ways women have they're still very gendered and women still have very limited roles. But anyway, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
Guys? Great dissertation, first off.
Thank you.
And I really enjoyed reading and reading through it and seeing all the examples. And sorry for the horrible messages you get from people on the internet sometimes.
What was great is that I think that happened in 2011, so I had already gone through enough graduate study to look at those, take a step back, and go, ooh, data.
I remember because you were here, right, when you were the Xbox person.
Yes.
Yeah. So I remember, I remember you having that reaction in the moment. That, look at all this data that just got thrown at me. So I totally remember that. What I really liked about the presentation as sort of, this next sort of thought of how you distill this document into something, I really liked how you went back and framed your methodology through that circle so clearly, that you were matching the, this, I chose this because this gets me at creators. And I thought that as sort of going forward, I mean, I don't know how much writing of this length you'll do in the future. If, good for you if you never have to write something this long again in the future. But that I thought that was a really good example of signposting in your work. And I think that from the draft I read, I think sort of going forward, if you do more writing, that's what I need to see, because sometimes in the draft of the dissertation itself, you like, especially in the literature reviews, you'll go like 5 straight paragraphs and this, start with the author's name, and you kind of lose that narrative.
Right.
And then sort of, in the end, I see why you took us there. But I think it would up the ease for the reader a bit more if you were more conscious about it. And you're so good at it, too, which is what's awesome. This is like a totally natural skill for you. So it's just sort of bringing those moments in. And then sort of maybe a more meta question is, this has spanned you've been here for quite a while.
Yep.
And so how do you think in terms of audience feedback, probably when you started, it was much more just through forums and things like that. How do you think the fact that more people now broadcast themselves on YouTube and Twitch and the technology, how do you think that has changed the audience to creator feedback thing from just the forum days when
Okay.
I mean, it was there early when you were doing this, but it's not at the level it is now.
So specifically the feedback between players and
Right.
creators?
The fact that people are able to, it's more easy to broadcast your set. You're not just a string of text anymore. You're a you are your own avatar in these feedback things.
Yeah, it's a blessing and a curse. I've had experience as a community manager in games, and a lot of my current work in the games industry focuses on interfacing and basically being the bridge between the creators and the players. And people often describe it as drinking from a fire hose. The more popular you get, I, for example, am very lucky to have the community that we have in my work. I do not envy the person who has to manage the Call of Duty community, for example. The more popular you get, the bigger the fire hose gets. And it's actually been really useful to have the kind of sociological mindset to be able to try and distill and gather themes from that feedback in order to relay it back to the creators and kind of cut out a lot of the noise. 'Cause even still, even though you have a lot of these different ways to present, more developers are presenting their stuff via broadcasting platforms like Twitch, oftentimes it's still kind of hard to have these folks be humanized and for the community to treat them as humans instead of, just 1,000, monkeys in a room trying to type Hamlet in the form of the next video game. These folks are human. It is, even though it is easier to interface with a community, it is often still a lot harder to really cut through the meat and the noise. And it's why the entire industry of community management exists, because developers often just get so much. And especially a lot of the folks that I've worked with in development, they will tend to hyper-focus on the one person that told them that this gun was balanced wrong, and they will kick themselves for it, and I go, no, it's okay. That's only one voice. You have to look at all of this data more holistically. So it is still a struggle. It's gotten better, maybe gotten worse, but it is still an ongoing struggle for sure.
Great presentation. Thanks
Thank you.
for having us here. As I was listening to your presentation, I thought that there's an interesting subject matter that you bring up. There's an underlying theme of kind of challenging traditional forms of resistance to gender roles, right?
Mm.
So I wonder, how do you think people who have been in the fight for this subversion of gender roles for a really, really long time might feel, how do you think they'll feel about these new forms of platforms as potential sources of kind of like resistance to it? Do you think you're going to have pushback on it, or do you think it's going to be easily integrated as a tool for a larger fight for equity among genders? Or
I would hope that as the kind of pace of technology and maybe access to tools becomes a lot easier, that it would be a lot more apparent. In fact, I think especially when it comes to sort of music in particular, the tools to create music and the need for having to be signed to a record label that would then market you and push you, I think that because those tools of creation and promotion have potentially been a lot more democratized, I'd like to think that we have avenues to be able to see more diverse populations in terms of the creation of music. I do find, though, that when it comes to that would be sort of good for a kind of mid-level of popularity, but I still feel that in terms of kind of getting to the top of someone's radar, I still think that there are issues in terms of sort of breaking that gap into sort of more mainstream popularity, because these attitudes tend to be so pervasive. Not sure if that answers the question.
You do think about these games as potential sources of social change, right?
Yes.
I'm not misunderstanding.
No, I definitely do.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess the question is linked to that. I think when people think about things that bring about social change, most people think about, I don't know, a march
Yeah.
or a policy change.
So I give maybe going back to my analogy, we don't often realize how much success in something like sports leads to other forms of success, social success, economic success, especially for men, right? We see that throughout school. And these are opportunities, that's why when reason we have Title IX, that we realized that women had to have equal access to sports, because success in sports translates into lots of other social goods, right? And so I'm actually thinking, how does success in these, first of all, gaming, and using this technology, we think of this all as, well, this is all just play and entertainment, but there's serious stuff going on and being used, and we might think of this is all just play and entertainment, but guys get to use this and reap other social benefits from it, including sexual benefits, but beyond that,
careers.
and including careers, and including social popularity, and they develop skills of teamwork and networking. And so it seems to me that the popular culture mastering this, whether it's in gaming or in this music, popular music, that they're also, it allows for guys to develop these kind of social skills and get access to other social goods that girls and women don't have access to.
I think that's a great point, because, and I'm already thinking about the publication.
How
do you frame an important publication with these findings? And I think a potential framework for us is to, how do we rethink video games as social interventions? Because we think of social interventions as, group sessions or a workshop that you complete in your telephone, but we don't think about video games as social interventions. What you're posing is that there are instances, few, but there are. You're finding them slowly but surely, where these video games actually are becoming that. It's allowing you to think about gender in a different manner. So I think that's a framework for a publication right there.
Oh, definitely. Yes, I agree. In fact, this is sort of more kind of anecdotal, but even something like when I live stream my gameplay via Twitch, and we often get a chance to preview the song that's going to be available that week. And in Rocksmith in particular, they are often bombarded with very strict regulations from the community about what rock music is. And this isn't rock music. I thought this was Rocksmith, not Popsmith or something. And we experienced this when playing songs by Lady Gaga. There was a pack of songs by Lady Gaga, and the developers, got a lot of pushback from the community for it. I would argue that it's not just because of the genre of music, but because it was a woman artist performing it. But when we actually were able to dive into the songs and play and show this off to the community, we got a lot of feedback that, I didn't realize that the song was so complex.
So hard to play.
Yeah, so hard to play or so complex, or, I didn't know that this intricate musical thing was happening.
And that's a really interesting example, because what I think that part of the challenge that you're tackling is that you're dealing with a two-headed monster here. You're dealing with two communities which are very essentialist in their practices. Rock music is really essentialist, and people think that rock music is kind of like anything can fit in there when it's really not. And when you get into the even more extreme forms of rock music, it becomes even more essentialist. And from what I gather from watching my son play video games, is that there's a lot of essentialism there too in the video game community.
Yes.
So I wonder if the games that are not, and you kind of tapped into this, if the games that are not rock related, that are not tapping into both worlds at once, kind of are freer to explore more gender differing world. I'm thinking about, for example, The Last of Us.
Yes.
Game of the year. Female co-lead in the game. You actually play with her, killing everybody in the process and saving men. Saving men in the process. Uncharted.
Yep.
It's the same game. Nothing really changed. But it's two female leads. So maybe that flexibility is there because it's not a rock game. Because if it were a rock game, then the flexibility thing would be even more hindered. I don't know.
Yeah. That I feel like that definitely makes a lot of sense, and I think even in more kind of role-playing fantasy type games where you do have the option to create your own avatar, Now, they don't often get it right 100% of the time. There have actually been multiple articles about how, for example, character creators, when you're trying to build your own avatar, they often still fail to get black hair right. And they still often fail to get skin tones incorrectly, and they don't light them well for the video game because they're potentially used to working with a more beige avatar. So there are strides being made, but there's still a lot of work to do. And clearly, maybe if they had more folks in diverse positions that would be able to look at that and go, ooh, you did not quite nail that.
Right. Because if the video games are going to become interventions on the social world, then somebody has to intervene with the companies that are making them.
Exactly.
You gave a great example about the Rocksmith change in the look. And my immediate response was, do I change the look to be more inclusive, or do I change the look to get more people to buy the video game?
Right, and of course,
so
the company's got to make money.
There's a line there.
Yeah.
And I think that's where people like you come in. You're working with, if I understand correctly, you're working with these companies.
Yes.
So it's a way of intervening with the companies and showing them how to intervene on the social in a different manner.
Yeah, definitely.
For in terms of publications, there's a long literature on the integration of sports and how important it was for African Americans to be included in professional sports community, for Hispanics, for Asians, and how it changed our ideas about those different ethnic groups. And so, if sports never become gender integrated, not just for women, but also for people who don't conform to some gender binary. What will that mean for women's social progress, right? And I sort of think of what you're doing the same way, but to ask that. So I often ask my student, we see sports being integrated along lines of race and ethnicity, but not gender. What will that mean for women's social progress if sports never become, if women never have access? And I think you could ask the same question. We see popular culture and music and gaming being integrated along lines of race and ethnicity, but not gender, right? And so what does this mean as for women's social progress?
They're excluded.
If they're excluded,
Right.
and other social goods that then they won't have as much access to. And I think you could ask that question. What's interesting about your project is there's much more, as I've seen, maybe I don't know the literature, but there's been much more focus on that with respect to sports and less with respect to popular culture. So that's where I think what you're doing could be innovative, and showing that there's an important similarity there.
It's great. I think these comments are perfect. They're wonderful, and shows the importance of this frontier that you're working on, that very frontier where you're opening up industry and consciousness at the same time. I do have some comments, so that I have some edits that I'll send to you. Some of them are might take a little bit more work than others. For example, on page 16, sometimes you make comments that are this is technical and nerdy. This is like nothing to the content. I'm going to get on the content in a second.
Of course.
If you make a comment where knowledge from the literature is implied, like the misogynist comment, I forget where let me go back up. Where it says, it's rock and something about rock music being
Under the
feminist examination of music videos which gain traction and blah, 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 have typically been an exercise rooting out misogyny where it lies regardless of gender music being examined. That begs for a source.
Okay.
I want to know, how do you know this? So things like that, I've edited some that I want you to kind of just make it a more referenced document. One thing that you group together at the beginning again, when you get those nasty comments that you got holy Buddha, you do group them together with like slight flirtations and you're the scummiest slut ever, right?
Yeah.
All of that's one big
Yeah. I guess it would be
bundle,
good
right?
to divide them, yeah.
I don't know if you can, but I'd like to know, if nothing else, how many of those were there as a percentage of the slight come-ons, right?
Yeah.
Because you put them all together like slight flirtations, and then you put this narrative down where it really makes it sound like you always only got those. Yikes. And I guess one thing that it's impossible to know, right? But or is it impossible to know? Is there an industry source about rock music that can give us a sense of how many women vocalists are there out there in the world, or how many songs with women? Because we have this, clearly it's skewed towards men, right? And you say it's pretty much that's the way it is in music, right? So it's the canon itself is being replicated, but the numbers somehow kind of become less relevant. The sexism's still there, because it could just as easily been 90% men, 60% women, right? So, or whatever the percentage was. So it's not. The argument is still there, but I just wondered. I have a question here about that. Is there a
contact Library of Congress music section? There's a link. Ask the librarian if anyone in the United States knows off the top of their head. They do.
Right.
So that might be just an interesting, just to kind of round out the data, right?
Yeah, and I was just thinking about that last night. I'm going, it would actually be kind of interesting, maybe even as just a paper, to maybe look at the actual Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Canon, right?
The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame,
right?
If there's one person in academia that knows that number, if it even exists, we should quote her. It's Dina Weinstein at DePaul University. She should have, if there's anything like that, she should have.
She should have.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that would be an interesting. You're right, an article or just a backdrop to all of this.
Yeah. Totally.
Now it seems, again, I think we've touched on this with the other comments. The battle to be fought, it seems, part of the hardest battle to be fought is the hardwired part, right? Will developers create a flexible interface, or a interface that allows for the agency of the participant to express gendered, self-identifiable gender, right? And then you say that all of this can can have an impact, and I think we all agree, that you're on the right track to get this happening. But have you've been in the industry somewhat for a while now? Do people listen to you? Do they, when you say stuff like, because I'm not convinced. I mean, when that woman quoted the quote, "Don't make assumptions about gender," you know, that's like all men are created equal kind of rap. So I'm not convinced, just because you say it, I'm not convinced that that's really a restructuring, the subversion aspect of it. But you would be a better judge to convince me that do they really listen to you when you talk about it? Is it more than marketing? Is it any more than marketing? You know, is it really for the reason of this idea of subversion? Are we really talking about subversion, or are we really just talking about marketing?
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately we are at the point where the hiring practices of studios are not inclusive enough to say that we are making games more inclusive for the greater moral good. We're not there yet. No. So I think we do still have to talk to them in terms of numbers. However, people do listen. And I think it also depends on the studio and the integration potentially between development and marketing and publishing arms. The writer that I quoted also went on to say that even when they were looking at things like achievements, so you completed this particular challenge in a game, and it was a game that they were working on that I now know what game it is, but I probably still can't say what it was. There was an achievement called Maestro. Like, oh, because you did X number of songs with this level of difficulty, you earned the achievement Maestro. And she actually said, no, that's actually a gendered term. You can't really use that. We're going to have to fix something. And they did. So
Did you know?
it's I think it also depends on studio culture as well, as to whether there are enough people and it's enough of a collaborative environment to actually get those changes implemented.
Pollyannish about it. I mean, however it takes to get there, it's fine by me. You know, I mean,
And they're
but I'm
probably
just-
not separable in the sense that to market a product successfully,
Exactly.
they have to rely on the
The old way,
goodwill.
yeah.
Well, no, the companies want to be seen as making, having sort of political and street cred, right? This is the kind of product they're marketing. They want their consumers to see them as basically socially, good contributors. So those things
Right,
are
right,
meshed,
right,
right? Their ultimate aims may be, commercial and financial, but they're going to have to buy a certain amount of goodwill from their audience, from
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
consumers.
Yeah.
And to some of it means maintaining an appearance of themselves as being good social actors.
Yeah.
right?
And then, of course, you have to do it in such a way that it doesn't feel like just pandering, like, oh, you're just sticking a woman in there.
Exactly. They have to be careful they're not overlapping too preachy.
Yeah, it's a very fine line, and some folks do it with success, and some folks fall flat on their face, and it's taking a lot of work, but it's just baby steps, I guess.
On your sample, maybe in the text, I saw this and it didn't raise a flag or anything, but on your presentation, I didn't have in my head whether that sample was all women.
Oh, which one?
The survey that you did online.
Oh, no, that was not all women.
And how about the next slide, the harassment?
No, that was
That was the
total.
whole-
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
okay, all right. Okay.
Yeah, because there were, I think one of the respondents was a black man that had received harassment specifically due to race. So I think I lumped race, gender, and sexuality as a form of harassment that they received.
14% that suffered harassment is from the whole sample.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. For some reason that had to do with either their race, their gender, or sexuality. Instead of harassment that we don't typically label harassment that people say, oh, that's just gentle ribbing or, quote unquote, shit talking. Yeah.
You should tell us about 14%, how many of them are men
Right.
and women
Okay.
and black or whatever, because it could be that 90% of those 14%ers are women.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, another comment. I'm good.
One last source you might look at, there's a philosopher, Kate Mann, M-A-N-N-E, who's writing about the differences between misogyny and sexism. And she looks at misogyny as essentially when women step out of line, they're often penalized for not conforming to their gender roles. So sexism is more the theory and the explanation of how men and women are supposedly different, but misogyny is the enforcement of it. So one of the things you might look at the kind of trolling that's going on with women in the gaming industry as this kind of either verbal and unfortunately sometimes can lead to physical violence, misogynist violence expressed at women who are stepping outside of their roles by stepping into what are seen as masculine roles in the gaming industry or in the rock industry. Anyway, that might just be a useful theoretical distinction to help think about what was going on and analyze unfortunate data you got when you were being trolled and harassed, but also just getting these expressions of misogyny, right? These misogynist posts directed at you.
In Connie Viamonte, when she did her dissertation on, this is another one of our students that studied World of Warcraft and sex and gender representation in World of Warcraft, and she found that guys very often would create female avatars because it would facilitate.
Yes.
It was a plus.
Mm-hmm.
You get stuff
Yeah.
given to you. You get you're treated with condescension on the one hand when you're in a dungeon or whatever, but at the same time you benefit from that. Is there a possibility to, in the two games that you mentioned, I should probably know them better than I do, to kind of invert your gender? Like, is there a way that you can be in a band that's several people playing at the same time and the others not know who you are?
I don't think there is. I think because of the latency inherent in, especially because these are rhythm games and you have to match the beat exactly, in order to get multiple people to connect together and have your rhythmic experience match.
Okay.
I believe that's relatively hard to do for those particular games in an online setting. So you would probably see more opportunities like that in a World of Warcraft or a Call of Duty or more of a more of an MMO setting. But also another sort of limitation is that I do focus on the first Rock Band, and I kind of haven't been keeping up with the genre sort of or the Rock Band as much. I want to say that there is some sort of online battle component in recent iterations, but I don't think the avatar necessarily plays along with it.
Right. You have to actually communicate with somebody at some point.
Right. Yeah.
I just was trying to imagine what a Rock Band MMO would look like. Well,
That'd be
there's
awesome.
the Metallica dungeon.
Just
Do a
fighting.
raid.
Everybody's fighting for gigs and
All right, so now
To the audience.
Peanut gallery back here.
and we're also getting peanut gallery questions from the Flesh Space folks as well as Twitch. Is there anybody on Twitch too?
Yeah, we've got the chat in here. We had a really great question that you immediately answered. And Happy Dude is very happy to have heard his answer. But he was asking about your view on gender in games where you get to pick your avatar.
Yeah.
And you spoke about they don't get the hair right.
Yeah.
The other person, the only other person I want to point out is the community manager for Rocksmith was.
Oh,
watching.
hey,
He
Dan.
had to leave, but he's, you mentioned the thing about the carnival barker.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Ooh, that doesn't make me want to play Rocksmith either." But he acknowledged that it happened. He says your data is still very valid, and the future looks better for them. They've learned, and he's already shared this to the entire team.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. Hey, there you go.
Yay.
Making changes
Congrats.
live on his page.
Yeah,
Woohoo!
I wanted to ask about that because you all did touch on it in various questions and in your responses, but this is, you spent all this time very academically doing this thesis, which is completely different or very different from what's going on outside of these walls. And you did say that you had one situation with a creator who realized that Maestro was not going to cover it. Have you had other practical aha moments like that already in your work?
Oh, yes. So for full disclosure, I currently work for a video game developer and publisher back in Texas. And as part of the marketing arm, we're actually a relatively small team, and we tend to interface with our developers a decent amount. It's even not necessarily even in a gender context, but having someone, having a Puerto Rican in the room and a former geography teacher in the room, that when they say that this text on the back of our box needs to get translated into Spanish, and then I say, which one? Having someone to be able to ask the question of which Spanish are we talking about? Is this Latin American Spanish? Is this Spanish from Spain? Just out of curiosity. And then every once in a while you see the people light up and go, I didn't know there was a difference. I'm like, yes, there is. Just making sure. So even just sort of being that resource for some of that stuff has been hopefully they consider it a good boon to have me on their team. I'm talking to the camera because they might be watching. But yeah, even sort of little things like that has a sort of definite impact. And even in my work in interfacing with the developers and basically taking back community feedback and digesting it, that is something that I actively do. And yeah.
And then another question, did you have an age limit in your survey? Were you getting responses from like 13-year-old kids, or did you know?
I want to say that I didn't, because I didn't necessarily focus on age as part of the work. I kind of sort of glanced over it a little bit. I do believe I did give age ranges, but when it comes to people that I've talked to, it's all over the place.
Right.
And that's another kind of interesting point to bring up, is that still the stereotype for a video gamer is 13-year-old kid in their mom's basement, and it's so not that anymore. Because there are people that have grown up with Atari and old Nintendos that are now older and parents, and they're still gaming. And even those messages that I get, guaranteed, they're not all 13. These are also grown adults doing all sorts of this kind of stuff, which I think is almost why it's doubly important to see these kinds of representations, because gamers are not just teenagers, but they're also parents, and they have the capability of potentially raising kids with these representations available to them. So.
In all the interviews and conversations you've had over the years, was there ever a moment where somebody realized that there is a problem? Or were people routinely waving it aside and saying, well, we market to the biggest market?
Actually, no. I fully expected that when I went into those development studios that they would say, well, yeah, of course, we market to dudes. In fact, whenever I would point things out, I fully expected when I said, I am looking at gender in music games, they would go, oh, okay. Or, no, we don't do gender. This is a gender neutral game. There is no gender anywhere in this game. You're probably thinking of, Lara Croft or something. Like, no, I actually didn't get that. In fact, people were relatively receptive. I didn't push to hear that survey information for Rocksmith. The person sort of gleefully gave it to me as sort of, oh my gosh, yes, we conducted a player survey and we saw that it was this and we were not happy with it. We were super surprised. I don't know how that happened, but that happened and we sought to change it next time. And I mean, just the fact that someone actually sees that 99.7% male player base as a problem instead of, oh, this is just where we're going to shift our marketing money, I thought that was a big deal. Yeah.
I promised I wouldn't say anything, but I did have one small. I'm gonna look it up for you. I have one small observation because I'm such an old woman. But what I'm feeling very hopeful, because in years past you would need a consent decree to get anything changed, and it looks to me like what you're doing is you're changing it maybe more subversively, but for the better, with a lot less upheaval. I think there's going to be, and I know you get nasty things, but I think there's probably a lot less pushback than there was when people were forced to be hired under consent decrees and stuff like that. So that's my only observation.
Yeah, it is a lot better.
It's marketing, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to do it through marketing, that's great. And I think maybe in one more generation, things will be a lot more copacetic.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of one of the key features of the work is that it's not just the game code itself, it's also in who you're talking to when you're selling this game to people. And it's like, just make sure you're talking to everybody. Make sure that if you are using people to play your game for your community, that yes, have women that also play guitar. Have people of color playing the guitar. Show that if they can do it, you can too, Representation matters. And there are a lot of places within a game's shelf life, which has become longer and longer. There are a lot of opportunities for that to exist.
It's better from a business aspect. Even if you just look at Cheerios commercials on TV, and you see black and white families, with mixed race children and stuff like that, and it's like it doesn't surprise any of us, or at least in this neighborhood anyway. It's almost normal now to see that.
Parts of Texas, not so much.
Yeah. It's like, once we get past novelty, then it's just people.
Yeah.
Is it too premature to ask if you're planning to maybe publish something more sort of publicly accessible?
Potentially. So part of this work, I brought my copyright release form. Part of this work did appear as an edited chapter in an edited volume. I would definitely be willing to, especially once I incorporate any and all edits necessary, to kind of really think about where I can sort of ship this off into a waiting academic world, but I'm also fully committed to, have this readily available in other kind of more public settings.
One
But
thing you might know, where social movements now are, usually there's prefaced with a hashtag now, so never again. There's a new one that came out of the Academy Awards last night, inclusive contract.
Yep.
And I wonder how that would apply to the gaming industry. So, Hollywood actors can now include in their, so Big Shot can say, I'll make this movie as long as you'll make sure that the other people you hire are, more representative, more diverse. So I don't know how it works certainly in the rock and music world, that people could do that, right? But in the music, where it interfaces with gaming, would there be a way for the big players to say, look, I'll work with you, but I want to make sure you have a diverse team, and then I'll work with you?
Potentially. There's, in video games, there was actually an initiative, because a lot of what we do, we tend to show off at things like the Game Developers Conference, where game developers will get together and share their knowledge industry-wide. And other places like video game conventions will also have places where developers can have panels and share their knowledge even with the wider audience. And there was actually an initiative, and it might have started as a hashtag, but it turned into a whole initiative called Diversify Your Panel. And it was basically making sure that people signed a pledge that said, I will not be on a panel about any aspect of my industry unless this panel is diverse. So there are initiatives like that are happening. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Should we leave?
Okay, I think we're good.
Cool.
Should we leave?
We
No.
stay. There you
We
go.
stay. The
There you go.
broadcast cuts off.
All right. Bye, everybody on Twitch. Love you. Thank you so much for all your support. Signing out and rock on.